spent the last 3 years studying fake news, and in particular studying sort of Russian disinformation, and would like to describe to you sort of 3 phases of that work. From the study of Russian disinformation to the study of Russian style disinformation, or the Russification of disinformation, to the disappearance of the Russians. And this is in Europe. And this is what the talk is going to be about. So it was in, I think it was in 2016, when people thought it was really funny to look at Russian disinformation, like humorous. So the American magazine, Harper's, published a list of Russian disinformation quotations as humor. So one of them said, for example, that all European children sleep with Hitler dolls. So this is Russian disinformation as humor. However, it got serious in the end of 2016 in the United States. This is, for many people, the birth of fake news. This is a story in BuzzFeed News, the American online news source, where it was found that fake news outperformed mainstream news in the run-up to the 2016 elections. That is to say, fake news had more engagement than mainstream news. And this was the famous graph that showed that. Since then, the idea of fake news, or the more appropriate term, I think, from the Oxford Internet Institute, junk news, has been widely covered. And there have been many, many studies, many more than you would imagine, into the phenomenon. I think most every European country, Western European country at least, has commissioned a national study. And I was the one who did it for the Netherlands, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit towards the end. So these are the 5 things I'm going to talk about briefly in terms of disinformation, fake news. I'd like to talk about what it is in terms of narratives. Fake news and disinformation has a number of different genres, and they're all to be distinguished ontologically from each other. Secondly, some genres perform much better than other genres in social media. And I'll show you an empirical study about how a particular genre, disinformation, does much better than other genres on Facebook. Where the Russians are concerned and Russian style fake news, disinformation is concerned, I want to talk about a media placement strategy. Where is it placed and how is it placed? I also want to talk about a content strategy. What types of stories or narratives sort of work best in which places in the media? I want to talk also about detection. How can you detect certain sort of fake-ish news sources versus mainstream news sources? And I'm going to talk about detection from the point of view of trackers and cookies. Fake news tends to have different kinds of cookies than mainstream news. And then finally, I'm going to tell you about the study that we did in a specific European country and talk about the extent to which the Russians are still present in European media spaces, especially in the run-up to elections. And I want to talk about the European parliamentary elections of last May in particular. So I'm talking about Russian disinformation and Russian style disinformation in Europe. And the data that I'm using is from the European Commission. You will have heard of it probably, the EU versus Disinfo project. It's a project that has collected thousands and thousands of Russian and Russian style, but mainly Russian, disinformation stories published across Europe. And so what we did is we looked at those that performed quite well, and we started to look at the style of each of these stories. And we determined that there were at least 3 genres. One you could call disinformation, and the second one you could call conspiracy, and the third one you could call clickbait.